Welcome back, and thank you for joining us for the Carbon Trust Corporate Sustainability Summit. I'm your host, Sasha Kadri. As we begin this session, just to reiterate, we would very much like to continue the great interaction we're having with you, our virtual audience. So please do keep those questions coming in, and don't forget to upvote the questions you want asked the most. Well, it's time now to focus on sustainability within the pharmaceuticals industry. Our next speaker is responsible for the company's sustainability strategy and managing their commitment to the UN Global Compact. I'd like to introduce Uffe Rasmussen, Senior Director for Compliance and Sustainability at Lundbeck.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope you've all had a great lunch and are not too satisfied and still have some appetite to learn some more. Kicking off, I would like to have the first slide. And the next slide, please. Just to say who we are. So this is an introduction of Lundbeck, 3 slides on that. A global pharmaceutical company. We're specialized within the treatment of brain diseases, and that's a very, you could say, a very sensitive topic. So we have a lot of stakeholders, a lot of critique on how to address, specifically within our therapy areas, even. So we are used to having a lot of stakeholder, a lot of societal discussions. We are a highly focused, patient-focused, patient-driven company. And you see our core beliefs or values here in the middle. And also to the right, the far right, our strategic role is to grow our company. But of course, we do not just want to grow our company. We want to make a difference to patients, and we want to grow our company in a sustainable way. So the next slide, please. Just a few key figures on the size of our operation, and you can see we're a fairly tight outfit, close to 6,000 people on a global scale. Most of these people are working in the field, visiting doctors, and that is roughly half of the population you see there, roughly just above, actually, 3,000 people. So every day they are in a car and driving, so that's part of our carbon footprint. As I said, we were also a research and development manufacturing company, so we also have a lot of impact there, and we of course have distribution of our products. However small, they sometimes need to get to the patients in a very fast way, so we use a lot of air transport as well. Our revenue last year was roughly 2 billion euro, and as you can see, we are present in 50 countries around the world, or more than 50 countries around the world. I think it's also important to say that the value we generate and our stakeholders, to our shareholders, is very much a foundation. We have a free traded proportion of our share of 30%. And 70% actually is owned by this foundation that was founded also by the founders of our company more than 100 years ago. So we have a rich tradition in giving value back to our shareholders. And in this case, the Lundbeck Foundation actually gives back to society. So this is a core part of our sustainable footprint, you could say, that we actually give back to society through donations, support to research. So that's a core element. Next slide, please. Just to say a few words about our sustainability strategy. At the top, our purpose. So we are dedicated to restoring brain health so every person can be their best. And that's, of course, also linked to, and here we have mirrored the sustainability strategy and the Sustainable Development Goals. And as you can see, we are, of course, our operation is very, and our purpose is very closely linked to Sustainable Development Goal number 3. But right at the top also is pursuing a zero emissions future. So climate action has been and is and will be in the future also at top of our sustainability agenda. I'll get a little bit into why that is later, but certainly we have this very clear commitment to the zero emissions future. Naturally, there are other aspects of our operation that influence or where we will use our influence to promote the Sustainable Development Goals. Specifically, or some of the core areas that we have identified where we have a significant impact is on gender equality, decent work and economic growth, reduced inequalities in many ways, not just within health, but also within economic opportunities. Sustainable production or responsible production and consumption through circular economy. And lastly, avoiding corruption and working, because we work greatly with institutions, public institutions. So doing that in a responsible way is critical to us. Next slide, please. Of course, in the nature of this speech, I would like to focus on climate. And here you see, in the graph, you see a representation of how we, over the more than a decade, we have managed to reduce our CO2 emissions by close to 70%. That has not come about just by chance. It's been a deliberate strategic effort, highly driven by conservation of energy or energy conservation. And you could see that, or say that this is actually quite challenging when working in the pharmaceutical industry, where you have a number of quality standards to meet. Imagine a laboratory or a facility doing production where you have a lot of volatile organic solvents, compounds that are in the air. So we need to keep this air clean for our workers. We need to filter the air clean for our neighbors. And that comes with a lot of energy consumption. So exactly doing that, challenging our engineers on how we can achieve this pure air, both to the outside and the inside working environment, without using too much energy, or while reducing our energy consumption. That is looking into the air shifts in the laboratory and production facilities, turning down the ventilation basically, and also looking at quality standards where cooling is a critical factor. Turning down or optimizing the way we do cooling has been a significant part of how we have managed to reduce our emissions or our energy consumptions. We have also looked into entirely new ways of manufacturing. And that is something where we are looking at in the future. We will be looking at more, instead of having big volumes to produce in, we will be moving into a very controlled small environment, literally from thousands of liters to maybe even less than a liter of chambers where we will run our reactions, pulling out, building like what you build with Lego, building the compound, building the molecule, and then being able to extract that molecule from that volume. This will reduce not only our energy consumption considerably, but also reduce the consumption of solvents. That is our main raw material. Over the years, we have been, we could say, recognized by the CDP. We've been working with CDP for many years, but the last 4 years we've been part of the list, the A list of companies recognized for our efforts, and we've been working with science-based targets as well. So I think actually we were the second company in Denmark to set and define an approved science-based target. Next slide, please. What does the future look like? As I said, we are committed to a net zero future, and we will be working with a new period of a science-based target. So next slide, please. I'll take you through how we'll intend to do that. Next slide, please. Thank you. We see climate action, or the action we are taking towards reducing our carbon footprint, as a strategic enabler, and that comes with a lot of different dimensions. You could say we work with governments, or typically with states where you have socialized medicines or public medicine. And often there is a high interest in how we go about, how we do our business, not just within the field of producing our products, our medicines, but also with regard to other aspects. And this is actually a global theme. It's not just in Denmark where we have our headquarters, where there's a strong interest on corporate responsibility. No, it's actually also in the sales link, or when we go out in the field with our products. So we see this interest in how we conduct ourselves from Mexico, from Singapore, Southeast Asia, and across Europe, where there is a call on us from ambassadors and others to learn more about specifically also climate, what actions we're taking. We've been part of the Danish government's recently held climate partnership, where they invited industries to come up with proposals on how to address and meet the very ambitious climate targets that the Danish government has established. So we have actually been part of this partnership in developing solutions for the entire life science industry. And as you can see in the top right corner here, we have signed the business ambition for the 1.5 degree commitment, which is also a commitment to reaching net zero by 2050. And we are going about this in a way where we will be working with all our scopes, so scope 1 through 3. And of course, we need to have a very clear baseline. And we've been working with Carbon Trust on establishing our new baseline for 2019. You saw the nice decline while taking on, that was scope 1 and 2. While taking on scope 3, we're actually increasing of course, the challenge that we have. And we can also see that this knowledge, this new knowledge, has helped us internally to drive decision makers, because it's somebody else who has to run the scope 3 emission reductions than the ones who drove the scope 1 and 2 emissions reductions. In addition, I mentioned the sales representatives, or the running or driving cars around in the countries where we operate, that they drive in cars. So in addition to the traditional or our facilities scope 1 emissions, we have also brought in the emissions from these cars. And that actually has significantly increased our emissions. So you can see that the emissions in scope 1 actually are higher, or twice as much as our current scope 1 and 2 emissions. So this is new knowledge, but it's not just new knowledge within scope 1 and 2. It's also within scope 3. And you could see that you cannot see the categories, I'm sure, on this slide. You will be when you get the slides afterwards. But there are some areas, and that's specifically within, I mentioned production as one of our emitters. But actually, the non-product related purchase that we have is by far the greatest impact. That's the tall peak there in the column number 4. And that's actually when we do clinical studies and when we work with consultants. So this is a value-based, you could say, translation of our purchase in the market of these services, our call on vendors on these services. So that value we have translated into an emission through some emission factors. So that's of course a calculation. As we proceed, we will need to address, of course, these scope 3 emissions, and also getting a higher quality of data that you see on the right side here. Our next step and most immediate step is that we've actually submitted an application for a new science-based target that includes scope 1, 2, and 3. So let's look at the challenges ahead of us. Next slide, please. Yes, as I say, more or less rhetorically here, that we have a number of challenges ahead of us, and some of these challenges will be easy, or rather possible, and others seem rather impossible. But of course, we will, and we are dedicated and committed to addressing these. Let me just take you through some of these mentioned here on the slide. Obtaining approval of a new science-based target, I think we've done it before, and we're quite confident that we can do it again. So maybe that would range more on the scale to the easier side, at least. Getting access to sustainable energy supplies, well, that goes to both scope 1 and 2. And within scope 1, for instance, running our furnaces or heating our facilities, creating steam for our production and manufacturing, or the cars that I mentioned before, fueling those cars. I think we all know that that is a challenge, that the level of maturity in this field is low. And there are a lot of ethical considerations. So we're not the first just to jump on the biofuels, for instance, or just go electrical. I think that would not be our first move. So within scope 1, we're looking a little bit, we're pausing maybe a little bit, but we will be moving on that in the next phase. Within scope 1, it's a different story, because there we have actually, scope 2, we actually have better options to reduce our emissions. And we are currently, we're just in the last phase of entering an agreement with an energy developer whereby we will be reducing our emissions from our purchase of electricity. And we will be developing additional and new additional energy supplies instead of just buying certificates or buying our way through this. So we will actually be supporting the development of new energy supplies. I mentioned improving emission data quality, and certainly within scope 3 and influencing our partners to reduce their emissions, those two go hand in hand. You saw the peak before, which was on the non-product related purchase we have in the market. And that's, to a large extent, the clinics, the doctors that we work with on developing our medicines. So we will be working with our partners to understand better where do that high peak, where does that come from? So instead of having a value that we translate into an emission, we will be asking and getting the right data from these business partners. And we expect that that peak will go considerably down. An area where I was talking about also, there was a fairly large peak also with regard to the product-related purchases, that is the raw materials for our manufacturing, and also in the distribution of our products. And not least, of course, the distribution of people when we drive the cars around in the countries where we work. We have learned from the pandemic that we can do that last bit, that those sales calls or educational activities, reaching out to doctors in other ways than by visiting them. So we will be using digital technologies to a greater extent. and also hosting digital events, large events, maybe with up to several thousands of doctors attending. And that's across the entire pharmaceutical industry. You see this happening. We certainly also will reduce our travel, business travel in general. So in that way, we have seen the pandemic has brought about other ways of doing our business than we had envisioned even just a year ago. But other areas are very tough to change. So that comes maybe to the very traditional manufacturing, the organic synthesis of compounds that I was talking, the medicinal compounds that go into the medicinal products. That is a difficult task to change. But we are, as I said, we have been working with researchers, establishing over the last decade a whole knowledge of continuous manufacture, or continuous production, as it's called, or continuous synthesis of these compounds. I use the analogy to Lego bricks that you build together. So we will be working in this field to see whether it's possible to produce the future pharmaceutical compounds through those technologies. And in addition, we are also moving from the very small molecule to proteins, to antibodies, and they're working with, it's a lot easier to transform your production processes to more, you could say, sustainable manufacturing, because you're working with renewable sources. You're working in water instead of working in the very harsh environment of organic solvents. So certainly we will be looking into each and every step of our value chain to ensure that we can bring down the emissions from our production. And with that, that was my conclusion. I thank you for your attention and open it up for questions at your pleasure.
Joining us today. I'm so sorry, but we're probably running out of time and we won't have time for any questions today, but a lot of thought-provoking things that you mentioned, and it's really great to hear what's happening at Lundbeck. But thank you so much for joining us today.